The communication tool allows a user to generate an internal message to send to another user or group of users at the practice. Communications can actually be linked to a specific patient's chart as a means of documentation. This documentation, of course, can be sent to other individuals or groups of users, and it can also be used to just document an internal note, say, for example, a phone note, or to request some type of task to be taken in regards to a patient. Let's talk about how to send a communication from the system. To begin, we're going to navigate here in the EMR. However, communications can be generated from various areas within the system, including the EMR, the billing portal, and the iScheduler. For example, if we wanted to generate a communication as it relates to this specific patient, we would simply open up their chart in the EMR and navigate to the drop-down at the top of the screen located under the patient. The patient dropdown allows us to navigate into the communication option, which is highlighted here with the manila envelope icon. The patient communication option will show us all communications that have been documented. Think of this as like a thread of messages that have been saved to the patient's chart. We'll talk more about how to look at patient communications once we've explained how to generate a new communication. By selecting communication, a pop-up window will bring up on the screen what looks to appear exactly like an email template, where you'll have a box to send this message to an individual. Say, for example, you wish to send this to the nurse group, everyone in that specific nurse group. You can also send this to an individual user. Say, for example, I wanted to find that user. I could simply type in their name here. Once you've utilized a couple of these groups or these users a few times to send a communication, your account will start to save those individuals or those groups as favorites. So when you go to click inside of the to field here, it will allow you to just click on some of those favorited options in your list. You'll notice here in this example that we have a patient representative available. This means that this patient is connected to my medical locker and can receive messages from the practice. This would be a great option if we needed to communicate directly with a patient or generate a message to send to the patient's portal. In this case, we could send a message directly to the patient, Miley, by selecting their name. Once you've got the appropriate users selected in order to be the recipient of this message, you'll want to ensure that you update or modify the subject line. Most communications in most databases will be pre-templated as a new office communication. You might want to change this to the appropriate subject for this communication. Let's say, for example, we know that this patient called in because they would like a refill on a medication. We can simply type in that subject and then move into the body of the message to type in the request. Now, keep in mind, this is directly linked to a patient's chart. Typically, once a message has been sent from a patient's chart, there is not an easy way to get it to remove from a patient's chart. So you would need to have the recipient of that message or the sender of that message go in and remove that erroneous message from the patient's chart. Now we'll go ahead and type in the request here. Please process a medication refill request for this patient. And we will go ahead and send this message. Now there are two options when sending a communication. You can either send a message just like a standard email, which is utilizing the send option here at the top of the screen. The other option is to send this request as a task, which will require that a recipient or a group of recipients own that task in order to complete it. So in this case, if I send this to a group of people and an individual, I'm asking that someone out of those group of people own this task, take ownership, and then of course complete the task and put their notes inside of that completed task. For this example, I'll go ahead and task that over to those groups of people, which will now save that communication to the patient's chart. Now, there's a couple of ways that you can review communications once they have been sent. A communication will always display on the timeline located under the communication field with the manila envelope. You can, of course, hover your mouse over that to give you a preview of that communication. If you select that icon, it will actually open up a pop-up window to show you a preview of all of the communications that have ever been sent for a patient. This is called the patient communications window. Like I mentioned, it would show you a thread of all of the messages that have ever included this specific patient. You can, of course, also access that from the drop-down and select patient communications. In the event that a user needs to document a communication, but not necessarily send it to another individual as a task or as another message to another user, they can actually generate a communication message and send that to a group of individuals called completed communications. Most databases will have the completed communication group available inside of the list of groups. Simply type in completed or an abbreviated version of completed in order to find that user group in the database. What this allows a user to do is to easily document something that may pertain to a patient, but doesn't necessarily need to be sent to anyone. A perfect example of this would be a phone note or a phone call. We could say maybe the patient called and requested their lab results. We could enter that information in the system so that it does get tracked on a patient's chart, but it doesn't necessarily need to be sent to anyone. By sending this to the completed communications group, no one is going to receive that message, but of course it does save on side of the patient's chart. So if we were to look at those communications again inside of the patient communications, you of course will see that as a documented thread, but of course it's not sending to anyone. Lastly, we'll discuss how to remove a communication should you need to delink it from a patient's chart. So say, for example, we accidentally sent a communication with the wrong patient's chart attached. In order to remove a communication from a patient's chart, you would either need to notify the sender of that message or the recipient of that message in order to have them remove it. Those users can remove an attachment from a communication message by simply navigating to the communication task list in the upper left-hand corner and navigating either into their inbox or the sent items. From here, they can actually locate any of the messages that they have sent and simply right-click over the attachment to delete the attachment. This will remove the attachment from the thread so that it does not show up in the patient's chart. This completes our training on how to send a communication from a patient's chart. For more information on how to manage your communication task list, please feel free to check out that training video. You can find those training videos by navigating to officeemr.knowledgeowl.com.